My father stood up in the middle of a crowded courtroom and pointed directly at me. "She's a drug addict," he shouted. The words echoed across the room. My aunt smirked. My older brother looked satisfied. Even my father's lawyer seemed confident. For 3 years, my family had repeated the same story to anyone who would listen: that I was unstable, irresponsible, dangerous. I sat quietly and said nothing. Then the judge removed his glasses, looked directly at my father, and asked a single question. A question that changed the entire case. "Mr. Walker, are you absolutely sure you know what your daughter does for a living?" Suddenly, nobody was smiling anymore. My name is Olivia Walker, and by the time I turned 32, I had learned something painful. People don't always see who you are. Sometimes they only see who you used to be. And no one proved that more than my father. For years, he told the same story about me. At family gatherings, at holiday dinners, at birthdays, even to complete strangers. His version never changed. Olivia had problems in her 20s. Then he'd shake his head sadly, as if he were carrying some great burden. The truth was more complicated. When I was 23, I went through the hardest period of my life. I lost my best friend in a car accident. My engagement fell apart 6 months later. I struggled emotionally. I made mistakes. I spent time rebuilding myself. But I got help. I worked hard. And eventually I moved forward. Most people would call that growth. My father called it evidence. Evidence that I would always be a disappointment. No matter what I accomplished afterward. No matter how many years passed. Meanwhile, my older brother, Tyler, could do no wrong. Tyler was the golden child. Successful business owner. Married. 2 children. Large house. New SUV every few years. At least that's what everyone saw. Whenever relatives visited, Dad proudly talked about Tyler's latest achievement. Then someone would ask about me. The room would grow awkward. And Dad would deliver another version of the same speech. "She's still figuring things out." I stopped correcting people years ago. Explaining never helped, especially because my career wasn't easy to explain. After rebuilding my life, I had chosen a profession that surprised almost everyone who knew me. I worked with recovery programs, rehabilitation services, and court-supported counseling initiatives. Many of the people I assisted were trying to rebuild their lives after making mistakes. Some were overcoming addiction. Others were recovering from destructive decisions that had damaged families and careers. My work required discretion. Confidentiality wasn't optional. It was essential. That meant I couldn't share details about many of the cases I worked on. Whenever relatives asked questions, I gave simple answers. Unfortunately, simple answers created complicated assumptions. My father interpreted privacy as secrecy, and secrecy in his mind meant failure. 3 years passed, then 5, then 10. Nothing changed. Every promotion, every certification, every professional milestone. He ignored them all. The worst part wasn't the criticism. It was knowing he genuinely believed it. My mother rarely argued with him anymore. She simply stayed quiet. Tyler avoided the subject completely. Eventually, the entire family accepted Dad's version of reality. Then everything became worse. 2 months before the court hearing, a legal issue involving a family trust surfaced. My late grandfather had established the trust decades earlier. The assets were meant to be managed responsibly and distributed according to specific instructions. Nothing unusual. Until disagreements started. Questions emerged regarding future management decisions. Family members took sides. Lawyers became involved. Meetings turned tense. And suddenly, my father saw an opportunity. Instead of discussing facts, he focused on me. Again, he began telling relatives that I couldn't be trusted with any responsibility connected to the trust. According to him, my past proved I lacked judgment. My old struggles became his favorite talking point. The story spread quickly. Aunts, uncles, cousins. Everyone seemed to have an opinion. Few bothered asking me for mine. One evening, I received a phone call from a cousin. Her voice sounded hesitant. "Is it true?" she asked. "Is what true? That you're not capable of managing anything because of your history?" I stared silently out my apartment window. Chicago's skyline glowed against the dark evening sky. After a moment, I laughed softly. Not because it was funny, because I was tired. So incredibly tired. 12 years, I said quietly. What? It's been 12 years since the hardest period of my life. Silence. Then she changed the subject. That conversation told me everything I needed to know. My father wasn't just repeating old stories anymore. People were believing them. So I stopped defending myself. I stopped arguing. I stopped explaining. Instead, I hired an attorney, a very good one. And together, we gathered every document we might need. Every record, every certification, every piece of evidence. Because for once, I wasn't going to fight family gossip. I was going to let facts speak. 3 weeks later, the court hearing arrived. I entered the courtroom and took my seat beside my attorney. Across the room sat my father, Tyler, and several relatives. They looked confident, almost comfortable, as if they already knew how the day would end. Then the hearing began. A few minutes later, my father suddenly stood,
pointed directly at me,
and shouted words that echoed through the courtroom. She's a drug addict. The entire room went silent. The silence after my father's outburst felt endless. Every person in the courtroom turned toward me. Some looked shocked. Others looked curious. A few looked as though they had just heard something they already suspected. My father remained standing. His face was red with emotion. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then the judge calmly removed his glasses and set them on the bench. Mr. Walker, he said evenly, please sit down. My father hesitated before lowering himself into his chair. The judge glanced at the court reporter, then back at my father. You've made a serious accusation. It's true, my father insisted immediately. She had problems for years. My attorney, Rebecca Lawson, placed a hand on my arm. A silent reminder. Be patient. Let him talk. The judge nodded. Very well. Explain. And my father did. For nearly 15 minutes, he repeated every story he could remember. Mistakes from my early 20s. Difficult months after losing my best friend. Times when I struggled emotionally. Moments I wished I could forget. He presented them as if they had happened yesterday. Each example sounded dramatic when removed from its context. Each story painted a picture of someone reckless and incapable. When he finished, he looked satisfied, almost relieved, as though he had finally convinced everyone. The judge turned a page in the file before him, then another. His expression never changed. How old are these incidents? He asked. My father frowned. What? The events you're describing. My father shifted slightly. Most happened years ago. How many years?
10.
12. Some longer. The judge made a note. Then he asked a question nobody seemed to expect. What does your daughter do for a living? My father blinked. The courtroom became quiet again. I don't know exactly. The judge looked up. You don't know? She says she works in counseling or something. Something? My father's confidence weakened slightly. She's always secretive about it. The judge turned toward me. Ms. Walker, would you please stand? I rose slowly. Can you explain your current profession? Yes, Your Honor. For the first time all morning, every eye in the room was focused entirely on me. I took a breath, then began. For the past 8 years, I've worked with licensed recovery programs and rehabilitation support initiatives. Several relatives exchanged confused looks. I continued. My responsibilities include helping individuals rebuild stability in their lives, coordinating support services, assisting families, and working alongside professionals involved in recovery and counseling programs. The judge nodded. How long have you been doing this work? 8 years. And before that, I completed specialized training and certification programs. Rebecca handed several documents to the court clerk. The judge reviewed them carefully. Certification records, professional credentials, letters of recommendation, continuing education records, employment history. The stack was substantial. The courtroom grew quieter with every passing second. I could see Tyler staring at the paperwork. My mother looked completely stunned. My father looked confused. The judge continued reading. Then he stopped at one document. His eyebrows lifted slightly. This indicates you've received recognition for your work. Yes, Your Honor. Multiple times. Yes. My father shifted uncomfortably. The confidence that had fueled his accusations was fading. The judge examined another document, then another. Finally, he looked directly at my father. Mr. Walker. My father swallowed. Yes. Did you know your daughter has spent years helping individuals rebuild their lives through structured recovery programs? My father opened his mouth, then closed it again. The judge continued. Did you know she has professional certifications in this field? No answer. Did you know she has worked with counselors, treatment specialists, and family support organizations for nearly a decade? Still no answer. Across the room, I noticed something remarkable. My father's attorney had stopped taking notes. The man was staring at the documents in front of him with growing concern, as if he suddenly realized the entire strategy had collapsed. The judge set the papers down, then folded his hands. His voice remained calm, but the question that followed changed everything. He looked directly at my father and asked, Mr. Walker, do you understand that your daughter has spent years helping people overcome the very problem you're accusing her of having? The courtroom became completely silent. Even the attorney sitting beside my father froze. And for the first time that day, my father's face lost all color. For several seconds, nobody spoke. My father sat frozen in his chair. The confidence that had filled the room earlier was gone. His attorney slowly leaned toward him and whispered something I couldn't hear. Whatever it was, it didn't help. My father looked down at the table. The judge waited patiently. Finally, he spoke. I didn't know. The words came out quietly, almost reluctantly. The judge nodded. That much is clear. He turned back to the documents. The courtroom remained silent except for the occasional sound of papers being moved. Then the judge looked toward me. Ms. Walker, one final question. Yes, Your Honor. Have there been any incidents involving substance abuse or criminal conduct during the past decade? No, Your Honor. Rebecca immediately provided additional documentation, employment records, background clearances, professional references. Everything verified the same story. Years of stability, years of responsible conduct, years of helping other people rebuild their lives. The judge reviewed the information carefully. When he finished, he looked toward my father once more. It appears your daughter has spent more than a decade demonstrating responsibility, professionalism, and personal growth. My father didn't respond. For the first time in my life, he had no argument, no criticism, no speech prepared, nothing. The image of me he had carried for years was collapsing right in front of him, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. Then something unexpected happened. My brother raised his hand, slightly. Your Honor? The judge nodded. Tyler stood. He looked uncomfortable, almost nervous. There is something I think the court should know. My eyes narrowed. I had no idea where this was going. Tyler swallowed, then looked directly at me. 3 years ago, when my business nearly failed, someone anonymously helped cover several emergency expenses. The courtroom listened quietly. I didn't know who it was at the time.
He paused.
Last week, I found out it was Olivia. I stared at him. Even Rebecca looked surprised. Tyler continued. When my daughter needed specialized tutoring after her learning assessment, Olivia paid for 6 months of services. My mother's eyes widened. And when Mom needed help after her surgery, Olivia rearranged her work schedule for weeks to assist without ever asking for recognition. The room grew still. My mother looked at me as if she were seeing me for the first time. Because the truth was simple. I had never spent years trying to prove my father wrong. I had spent those years building a life, helping people, supporting family members quietly, moving forward. The judge eventually finalized his decision regarding the trust dispute. The ruling was fair, based on evidence, not assumptions, exactly as it should have been. But by that point, the legal outcome almost felt secondary. The real change had already happened. For the first time, the truth was visible. After the hearing ended, people slowly began leaving the courtroom. Rebecca shook my hand. You handled that perfectly. Thank you. You should be proud of yourself. I smiled, not because I had won, because I finally felt free. As I gathered my things, I heard footsteps behind me. I turned around. My father stood there. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he looked down, a gesture I had never seen from him before. I was wrong. The words were barely above a whisper. Years ago, I had imagined hearing those words. Back when I still wanted his approval. Back when I thought proving myself would finally change everything. But standing there, I realized something important. I didn't need him to validate my life anymore. Still, hearing it mattered, because it was honest. I should have seen who you became, he said quietly. I kept looking at who you used to be. I nodded. Neither of us had a dramatic speech prepared. Real life rarely works that way. Sometimes healing begins with a single truthful sentence. Months later, things weren't perfect, but they were better. Conversations became easier. Old assumptions faded. New respect slowly took their place. And for the first time in years, family gatherings no longer felt like trials I had to survive. People often ask whether that courtroom changed my life. The answer is yes, but not because the judge defended me, not because my father apologized, and not because the legal dispute ended. It changed my life because it taught me something I wish I'd learned sooner. You cannot build your future by constantly defending your past. At some point, you simply have to keep moving forward. And eventually, the truth catches up. Even to the people who stopped believing in you long ago.